morning and welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up today, White House welcomes extension of humanitarian pause in Gaza. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says extended Gaza Truce not enough to meet aid needs. Plus, Israel's health ministry says freed hostages in stable medical condition. Thank you for joining us. The White House has welcomed the extension of the humanitarian pause in Gaza. It comes after Qatar, which has been mediating the talks between Israel and Hamas, announced that an agreement has been reached to extend the humanitarian truce for an additional 2 days. Speaking to reporters at a news briefing, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby says he hopes Americans will be amongst the 20 hostages to be released next, as 8 to 9 U.S. citizens are believed to still be amongst those being held.
The humanitarian pause in Gaza, now in its 4th day, will be extended for another 2 days, through Thursday morning Israel time. This humanitarian pause has already brought a halt to the fighting, together with a surge of humanitarian assistance. Now, in order to extend the pause, Hamas has committed to releasing another 20 women and children over the next 2 days. We would, of course, hope to see the pause extended further, and that will depend upon Hamas continuing to release hostages. Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, we're going to watch this very, very closely. We're certainly hoping that another batch of hostages gets released today as part of the 4th and final day of the original agreement. We're going to be watching closely to see if any Americans are in that group. As it has come out over the last 3 days, we don't really know until you get into the end game who's going to be actually on that list. And then even then, you got to watch closely to seeing if who's on the list is the folks that actually come out. So we're watching and hoping. It's a real risk. You have to expect a group like Hamas, a terrorist group, which clearly doesn't abide by laws of war, will try to take advantage of any pause in the fighting for their own benefit. So we're watching that closely, as well as our Israeli counterparts. You can bet that they're watching that closely. And I don't want to speak for the Israelis, but I mean, this is a calculated risk that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet are willing to take in order to get those hostages out. So it's a balance. And as you've also heard the Israelis say, that once the pauses are over, they intend to go right back at military operations.
Well, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has described the extended truce as a glimpse of hope and humanity, but warned it was not enough time to meet the aid needs of the Gaza Strip. United Nations has been delivering some humanitarian aid to Gaza via the Rafah border crossing from Egypt, but also wants to be able to use the Kerem Shalom border crossing controlled by Israel. Earlier on Monday, spokesman for the Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, says negotiations must continue with the aim of turning the temporary truce in Gaza to a full humanitarian ceasefire.
It will be impossible to satisfy. I would say it's a glimpse of hope and humanity in the middle of the darkness of war. And I strongly hope that this will enable us to increase even more the humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza that is suffering so much, knowing that even with that additional amount of time, it will be impossible to satisfy all the dramatic needs of the population in Gaza. I am sincerely hopeful that it will be possible to have other crossings, because they will facilitate the distribution, and that will also facilitate the control by the Israeli side. So I'm very hopeful that this will happen.
This is a momentous day in our lives, a relative of the Calderon family says, and they were filled with excitement but had not yet fully processed what had happened as his teenage relatives arrived safely in Tel Aviv hospital in the early hours of today. 16-year-old Sahar and 12-year-old Erez were amongst 11 hostages who were released late today on the yesterday on the 4th day of the truce between the Hamas and Israel, after being taken into Gaza and held for over 50 days. A doctor from Israel's health ministry said 11 recently freed hostages from Gaza are in stable condition in Tel Aviv hospital. The health officer says the 9 children and 2 women were spending time with their families in a quiet environment ahead of further necessary medical evaluation. So far, a total of 69 Israeli and foreign hostages has been freed by Hamas under the original 4-day truce.
The Israel hospital was prepared, and tonight a group of hostages was released from Gaza and arrived in Israel. The group is made up of 9 Israeli children, 2 Israeli women, after 52 days in captivity in Gaza. The Israel hospital was prepared and ready to receive them. In the hospital, the freed hostages met their families for the first time and will receive medical and psychological care as needed. We wish to remind you that these are sensitive moments for the freed hostages and their families, and we wish to preserve their privacy. The Ministry of Health expresses joy in the return of these freed hostages and wishes for the speedy return of all the other hostages.
We can say at this point that all our children and mothers are in a stable medical condition, and we will further on continue with medical evaluation. Right now, they are spending time with their families in a quiet environment, and we want them to be with their families in order to provide a quiet environment and supportive system in order to ease their come to Israel.
In the meantime, a British-Palestinian surgeon who was forced to flee last fully functioning hospital in Gaza City recounted some of what he has seen, according to him, at a news conference in London. Surgeon Ghassan Abu Sita says he'd witnessed horrific scenes and that for medical staff who stayed in Gaza, every wave of wounded people being rushed to Al-Shifa hospital risked turning into a personal tragedy. The surgeon, who also worked at the Al-Ali hospital, which was shaken from Israeli tank fire with no more anesthetics left to operate, told his team it was time to leave. He also said that up to 45% of the wounded at the Al-Shifa hospital were children.
40 to 45%. One of the most horrific scenes that I witnessed in Shifa Hospital was when, after the air raid and the dead and the wounded were brought in, members of the Shifa medical staff and nursing staff would be running frantically in the emergency department, looking at the faces of the wounded and the dead to see whether their relatives had been amongst the wounded, and in many cases their children had been amongst the dead and the wounded. During my time at Shifa Hospital, it became apparent that 40 to 45% of all the wounded were going to be children. That there were the primary target of the bombing was people's residential homes.
Now we're pleased to speak with Dr. Tony Agwans, a senior lecturer, Anglia Ruskin University, London, joined us from England. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning, Olumide.
Let's begin with the surgeon who says that 45% of the injured Palestinian civilians were children. And we also have unconfirmed reports that I'm not sure that he's the one or another surgeon, possibly he's the same individual, who says there were over 500 to 700 amputations that were conducted on children as a result of the war between Israel and Hamas. These are the horrors of war. Should the latter information be confirmed to be correct, that's something that will stay with these people for the rest of their lives. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. These are very, very difficult figures to hear. When you look at the report that is coming from Gaza, we are hearing of over 14,000. In some reports, some even said close to 15,000 lives have been lost. A majority are women and children. So it is the pain of war and the devastation that has happened in this crisis that began on October 7th. So
The caveat,
from the
please go.
figures you read out now, you will see that the casualty numbers on a daily basis have been increasing, except for the truce that have just taken place.
Now, the caveat to that, according to Israel, is that these figures should be taken with a pinch of salt because it's not independently verified and it's coming from under the control of Hamas.
Absolutely, yeah. There have been a lot of opposing views from the Israeli Defense Forces, who are saying that the figures are not correct. It's like the Hamas group, they are inflicting it. Nobody can really verify the figures. But when you look at the level of devastation, building collapse, so you will know that there are casualties. But like you said, nobody can actually verify the figures. And then the Israelis will tell you that they lost over 1,200 people on October 7 when that attack took place. So it's a kind of, a tit for tat, but a lot of people are looking at the proportional relationship between the numbers of Israelis that have died and the numbers of, Gazans that have been killed since this crisis began nearly a month plus ago. And then you now look at the humanitarian crisis that is taking place in Gaza and all that. So those are the pains that people in that region are experiencing at the moment.
The ambivalence I felt yesterday personally remains, but possibly overshadowed by the gratitude that 11 more hostages have been released as at today, and the hostage situation with the truce negotiated has been extended by 48 hours into tomorrow. But
Yeah.
of that number, of that 11 that were released, 9 were Israeli children with dual Israeli and other nationalities. Now, it begs the question, why Hamas in the first place set about to abduct and take children captive? What do you think was their end game? Because it's not like they're going to run a terrorist daddy daycare and take care of these children who are dependent on care of people. There is a 9-month-old, now a 10-month-old baby that is yet to be released. His name is Kifir, and other children as well that are yet to be released.
Yeah, I think, like we discussed sometime on this program, what Hamas did was, a tactical and strategic move to, take hostages. And it's been the recurring decima when things like this have happened between the Israelis and, any resistant group in Gaza. Even when it was the PLO, it was the same thing. So Hamas deliberately took these hostages, not with the intention of killing them, but to use them as bargaining chips. So if you look at it now, the Israelis are also releasing prisoners, a lot of them young people from Israeli prisons back to Hamas. So they knew what they were doing. They knew that they needed to get back at Israel somehow, and that is why they took these hostages since that October 7 attack. I was reading some report yesterday, and from the comment made by some of the released hostages, they were saying that even the head of the Hamas group even met with them in the tunnel and told them that they will not be harmed. So you will see that this was a very well orchestrated plan to get back at Israel, probably get some of their prisoners who are in Israeli jails released. So I think on that point they have kind of succeeded, and the Israelis, with the pressure that Benjamin Netanyahu and his government have been facing from families of hostages who were taken, they had to accede, to internal pressure and agree to this truce, which if we add all the days that it's going to be now, it will be 6 days. So I think the Hamas, they've been able to score a point there.
If you say it's a well-orchestrated plan, then how well-orchestrated is it when you find that Hamas, to their own admission, have said that they do not know the whereabouts of some of the hostages, and that other terrorist groups inside Gaza have captive hostages as well? There was a discourse between them and the Russians, where some Russian Israelis were being found. They say they will look for them. So if it was so well orchestrated, how come it wasn't organized to the point that they will know who they were kidnapping, how many there were? It's still up in the air, the exact number of people that were kidnapped.
Absolutely. And I think, let's not forget that where you have an environment where you have resistant groups, you're going to definitely have some splinter factions, some other mini militia within the main setup. So the possibility is there that some other groups may have also taken opportunity of what has happened to also take hostages. So even why it's very, very difficult for the independent and Western press to actually believe most of the things that the Hamas group they are saying, it is highly likely that the whereabouts of some of the hostages is not known. And it is also highly probable that some of the hostages may not, even be alive. You remember the issue of the proof of life that was being demanded at some point, and as we speak, that proof of life has not been shown. So all these are the nuances surrounding this hostage situation, and we just hope that whichever group within the splinters or other militia that are operating in Gaza, these hostages are still alive. Like if you notice, the Israeli government have said that for every extra 10 hostage that is released, that it will add an extra day to the humanitarian truce. So let's hope that all these hostages will get back safely, and then the exchange of prisoners and hostages between both sides will continue, and eventually we'll have a ceasefire.
It's a good thing to hope for. On the point of proof of life, it was bizarre that two individuals that were previously told by Hamas to the IDF and to the families of the hostages that were dead were found to be alive. And at least one that was thought to be alive was found to be dead. But let's now bring into this conversation the picture of the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, who've been criticized by Israel as being partisan, as being not fair in their estimation of what's going on between Israel and Hamas. In the case where we saw an individual an official from UNICEF who was describing the very dire situations in Gaza and how it continues to affect children, there was no such hue and cry on the October 7 massacre about the children that were kidnapped, that were taken, that were abused, and the babies that were beheaded, the children that were burnt alive. According to the IDF, there was no such hue and cry from UNICEF at that time. So that continues to deepen the schism between Israel and the United Nations.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. When you look at this crisis, my personal opinion has always been, I've always applied the law of cause and effect. So I believe that if we didn't have the scenario that played out on October 7 at the Negev Desert during that music festival, we will not be even having this conversation now. This huge loss of life that we have witnessed in the last 7-8 weeks will not have happened. So, and I think that as people, talk about this crisis, as people, push their narrative as far as this crisis is concerned, I believe that we should start it from what happened on October 7. Was it justified or was it not? So it is only when that conversation begins from that point, that is when I think we'll have a proper humanitarian perspective to this whole crisis. because people seem to just condemn Israel, to say, oh, look at the devastation, look at they want to, um, destroy Gaza and all that, but they don't really look at what caused this in the first place, and that is what you have actually alluded to, because some of the optics that we saw between October 7, 8, and 9, they were really gory. For some of us, it was really hard to watch. So people should understand that. And I think, to be honest, a lot of the United Nations officials have been really, really sympathetic, when you listen to their speech, right from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. So they seem to be very sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause. But experts have always contended that people should not just be looking at the Palestinian cause. They should also try to sift Hamas as a militia. Hamas has been designated by a lot of the Western countries to be an Israel as a terrorist nation, as a terrorist group. So people should see it like that, and then that will help in shaping the perspective they give. So because nobody can justify what the Hamas group did on October 7, it cannot be justified. Although some will say, oh, Israel, they are occupying their territory and all that. That is another argument that is very widespread. But we can't justify, no one can justify what happened there. So the whole situation is a kind of a reprisal from the Israeli Defense Forces. And Israel will always justify what they are doing, when they went for an all-out attack in Gaza.
You raise an important point when you talk about how the Palestinians and Hamas should be perceived as whether one and the same or not. Obviously, they are not the same, and there are people and Palestinians who possibly do not approve of the methods of Hamas' proclivity for violence. But how can you do that and also bring in the Palestinian Liberation Authority, and where the citizens of Palestine stand with the view of the indoctrination that many Palestinians, of whom the median age is in their 20s and in their 30s, consider Hamas as being the only solution to the problem that they have with Israel?
Yeah, I think that what you have said now is very true, and that is where the international community really need to step in. Let me use this point to, really congratulate, the Qataris, for what they have done. If you notice this truce that is being enjoyed now, Qatar has been at the forefront, supported by Egypt. They've really played, a good mediator role in this truce. So the international community need to step in. It's not all Palestinians that support the Hamas group. Years ago, it was the PLO, led by the late Yasser Arafat, that was the leader of Palestine. So now, since 2006 or 2007, the Hamas group, took over the Gaza Strip, and there's been very violent. And the thing with Hamas is that they do not recognize that Israel should exist, and everybody should understand that. So, and they are supported by Iran as well. So these are the problems. So I think the United Nations, the US, UK, European Union, even China, and other, superpowers in the world, they should really step in and see how both sides can be brought together. Talking of Palestine now, Palestinian Authority, because they have a president, Mahmoud Abbas. He just seemed to, be there, and we don't really hear much about him. And the Hamas group seem to be the one running the show. That should not be.
Indeed. And we are grateful, obviously, for these 2 days of the extended pause in fighting, and we certainly hope for more. And we indeed thank you for making out the time to be with us on the program this morning. Dr. Tony Agwans, a senior lecturer, Anglo Ruskin University, London, joined us from the UK. Many thanks.
Thank you and have a nice day.
You too. Still ahead, German and Israel's president visit the Kibbutz Be'eri, announced to rebuild art. Police officer, thank you for being with us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
How did you take the latest news of the extension of the truce or the halt in fighting, I should say, between Israel and Hamas and the release of these 11 hostages today?
It's a welcome development. Every peace-loving citizen of the world would be happy to see the hostages released, and they must, they must be released. And every citizen of the world would be happy to see that the bombs against Palestinians are stopped. Every law-abiding person would be happy to see the children and adults of Palestine to receive a better relief. Every thinking person would also hope that the rockets firing into Israel must also stop. So I totally support the idea of the extended ceasefire. I totally support the fact that human lives should stop being wasted. And so totally I support these ideas.
I mentioned earlier that 9 of the 11 were children. Some of those earlier released as well were women and children. About 59, at least 59, about 69 hostages have been released to Israel. About 150 Palestinians who've been in prisons, including many minors, have been released back to Palestine into the Gaza Strip. Now, staying with the children, because that forms the nexus of the number of the hostages that were taken. I don't know what informs a terrorist abducting a child, but possibly do you think that it was because they were placing a premium on the lives that they were taking to increase their leverage against Israel so as to negotiate for more Palestinians to come out of the prisons? But there is no premium on any human life. All lives matter, whether you're a child or you're an adult.
Totally. I support your narrative. Every human life matters. And you could also notice that in all this exchange of hostages, the exchange of prisoners, the adult men seems to be excluded. And I also use this opportunity to let people know that adult men, their lives also matter. As much as the lives of children matters, as right as the lives of women matters, we also have to include the lives of adult men. Because most time in international crises, men are treated as if they can endure, that they are allowed to die. You know, people always pay more premium to the lives of children, which is right because they are the next generation. People pay more attention to the lives of women, yes, because they are our mothers, our sisters, and everything. But we have to also pay attention to the rights of adult men. At times, it seems like adult men can be sacrificed easily, and they're not even part of this discussion. If you check the number from the 69 people that have been released, from the people that have been released from the side of the Israelis, and from the people released from the side of Hamas, it's obvious that adult men are kind of missing significantly, and their lives matter also. On the other side of the story about the ideas of the 69 hostages that were released, I think any organized criminal gang and terrorist organization, which Hamas is, we have to always be very careful the way we manage relationships with them, because if you don't manage these relationships very smartly, you could be giving out signals to other international prescribed terrorist organizations across the world. They could believe that they could stoke a fire, start a fire, and then they wish to start to cry for a ceasefire. So we need to be very, very mindful that other criminal organizations across the world are monitoring, other terrorist organizations are monitoring, because it's very important for us to know that Hamas is not the Palestine Authority. Hamas remains an organized criminal group. Hamas remains a terrorist organization, and that has not changed. So we have to be careful how we relate with them and how we say things that will make them to feel like a good brand, that copycats, what we call in criminal management, copycats across the world, be it organized criminal gangs, be it terrorist organizations can copy and believe they can set up this kind of 7th of October attacks, and then later they will start crying foul to get a ceasefire, because right now Hamas has run the best propaganda. Hamas has knocked down the Israeli propaganda machines. Hamas has been fantastic with their propaganda machines. They've been very mathematical. Every single narrative from the Hamas, we hear Zionist. The next narrative you hear from the Hamas, you hear the occupying forces. But the Israelis are not very smart in their propagandas. Yes, Israel is winning the war significantly, but Hamas is winning the war in propaganda terms.
So you say Hamas is winning the war propaganda-wise. Is that served also by agencies around the world who don't take the time to find out the truth and the facts of the matter before repeating the Hamas narrative, or maybe the Israeli narrative for that matter? The point is to report the truth as you see it and the facts as they are, and not because you are emotional about an incident that you hear for which you do not know the origins of that incident and the reasons why it happened in the first place?
You are absolutely correct. The issue of the historical background to this conflict, many people are not very sound students of history. And don't forget that historians also make a mess of our histories. I can give you one or 2 points. If you look at the issue of the history of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Israel, which is one of the areas of conflict, you can still hear about histories that there was an Israeli temple in that particular location before the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built on top of it. And a lot of people that are not students of history may not understand that. But not even going too far with histories, if you come back home to our beloved Nigerian country, once upon a time, you may have heard about where you call the Bight of Benin, which has now been, which was previously the Bight of Biafra. But somebody changed it from the name Bight of Biafra to Bight of Benin. So if you're not a strong student of history, Hamas and Israel have played propagandas that suit them, because we've discussed this during the Ukraine-Russia war, the importance of propaganda. A lot of people across the world, Hamas has won the propaganda war. The IDF has done a good job, but at times you get some of their journalists that mess up the narratives, and then they get a backlash. So in terms of propaganda, people don't follow history. People just join the bandwagon, the one that sounds very fashionable. Even to an extent, you find out that the protests in support of Hamas across the world became fashionable. People don't even know what is a Hamas flag. People don't even know what is a Palestine flag. They just carry a flag. That's why in policing we have experts in flags. They understand what a Hamas flag looks like, which is a terrorist organization, and they understand what is a Palestine flag, which is a very acceptable flag. So it's about people joining the bandwagon, seeing what is fashionable, and people are not very good readers. They don't research history to know the truth about narratives. They just join the bandwagon and just support and retweet and repost and just makes negative narratives to become positive. In African proverb, we say that when a lie is repeated consistently, it may start to sound like the truth. Thank you.
That's not only an African proverb. I think it's a worldwide proverb, and everybody knows that to be true. If you say something consistently enough and it's a lie, people begin to think it's true. But we hope that this this pause in fighting extends to yet more days and more hostages are released. And for goodness sake, all the children, at least the minors who are obviously can't feed themselves, they need help to answer the call of nature, they need medical attention, are amongst those given priority to be released. They're not going to run a terrorist creche or daddy daycare where they're taking care of these children, and which becomes more of a liability to them. But with your security background, what do you think concerning the October 7 Black Saturday attack in Israel? If the Israelis had the right to bear firearms like in the United States, and civilians all were armed who had licensed firearms, this wouldn't have happened the way it had, would it?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Before I respond to that question, there is a term that you used that we have actually cancelled in policing in the UK, for example. When he said the term Black Saturday, we have stopped the use of that term. That is how narratives get into the subconscious of people and they use it. The word black, I am a black man, and so we changed the word black to red. So you could rightly say it was a red October 7th Saturday. Don't use the term black, because it could be subconsciously misunderstood and retwisted or made to be used against certain ethnic groups. Then to your issue about the so-called Black Saturday or the Red Saturday, the bottom line is the history of what led to that event is still very clear to all of us. What is not clear to most people is the preparations and how the Israeli Mossad if they missed the preparations or if they were aware. Some schools of thought believe that Mossad were taken unawares, whereas some schools of thought, like myself, believe that Mossad were aware, but they're just waiting for the Hamas to step into the red zone so they can get what they are getting right now. So I could be wrong, I could be right. But the idea is Hamas prepared very well. It wasn't only Hamas that attacked Israelis on the 7th of October. Hamas came in with other terrorist organizations in the Gaza and some that came in from the West Bank. But I said this thing last time we discussed here. There is a thin line, like if you watch movies or you read books, which I know you do, there's a thin line between love and hate. There's a thin line between a Hamas member and a Palestine. Most Palestinians support Hamas. Majority of Palestinians are loyal to Hamas. Why? Because Hamas is the political party in charge of Gaza. Hamas runs the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, and every ministry in Gaza Strip. So if you don't support Hamas, you are almost dead. So most Palestinians are Hamas loyalists, Hamas sympathizers, Hamas supporters. So there's a thin line between who is a Hamas member and who is a Palestine that lives in the Gaza Strip, because it's more like in Nigeria or other countries, the ruling party dictates the tone, and then the piper has to just sing along. So that's one of the challenges you have in the Gaza Strip about who is Hamas and the thin line between them and every other Palestine because of issue of threats, loss of life, loss of income, and loss of unemployment. It's a very big challenge for Gaza.
Yes, indeed. We'll leave it there. We hope for more progress in the pause in fighting between both sides and the release of more hostages and a resolution of the conflict in the Middle East. I wish we had more time on what you said about black having a negative connotation being used for Black Saturday, or, well, we're not really black, are we? We're really kind of brown. We're Negroes. So
I am black. I am not black. I am black. I don't know about you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vincent Yekwelu. Mr. Vincent Yekwelu is a national security risk strategist and former British police officer who joined us from Anambra State. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians, once again.
Still to come on the program, friends have released teenagers happy to welcome them home. More details in a moment. Please. Welcome to the final stretch of today's coverage of Israel-Hamas war. Egypt's Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry says it was time to enforce the two-state solution in order to end the conflict between Israel and Palestinians. Mr. Shoukry's statement echoed Arab states and European Union agreements at a meeting in Spain on Monday that the two-state solution, which envisaged a state for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip alongside Israel, was the best policy to end the conflict. The Egyptian Foreign Minister was speaking on the sidelines of the Union for the Mediterranean Summit in Barcelona, a 43-member grouping of European, North African, and Middle Eastern countries. However, Israel did not attend the summit.
The two-state solution is still the consensus of the international community, but at this stage it is not a matter of a process to manage the conflict and not reach a conclusion, and the establishment of the Palestinian state is not acceptable. The international community has the ability, the mechanism, to enforce a two-state solution, to implement a two-state solution. The issues have been negotiated between the two parties over the span of 3 decades, and we cannot rely any longer on the reoccurrence of conflict by virtue of policies that do not support peace but support increasing violence and polarization. We believe it is time to implement the two-state solution. It is time to create the Palestinian state so that we can finally have a conclusion to this conflict. We oppose the displacement, any form of displacement inside the Palestinian territories or any efforts to displace the Palestinian people outside of their homeland. This is an effort, if it is materialized, to liquidate the Palestinian cause and to free the Palestinian lands of their inhabitants, which represents a violation of international humanitarian law, but even a war crime.
The White House says U.S. President Joe Biden was horrified by the shooting in Vermont of 3 Palestinian-American college students over the weekend. White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre says there's absolutely no place for violence or hate in America. The 48-year-old suspect in the shooting of the 3 college students of Palestinian descent in Vermont pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of attempted second-degree murder on Monday and was ordered by a judge to be held without bond. The suspect, Jason J. Eaton, appeared at an arraignment at the Chittenden County Criminal Court in Burlington via a remote video feed from the county jail where he has been held since his arrest on Sunday.
The President and the First Lady were horrified to learn about the 3 college students of Palestinian descent, 2 of whom are American citizens who were shot Saturday in Burlington, Vermont. The President continues to receive updates from his team about the ongoing investigation. These students were taking part in a uniquely American tradition, gathering with family and loved ones to celebrate Thanksgiving. They should be back in school with their classmates, not in a hospital room. The President, First Lady, and everyone here at the White House join Americans across the country in praying for their full recovery, and we send our deepest condolences to their families and the broader Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim American communities. While we are waiting for more facts, we know this: there is absolutely no place for violence or hate in America. No person should worry about being targeted while going about their daily lives.
German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and his Israeli counterpart Isaac Herzog visited the Kibbutz Be'eri on Monday, where more than 100 residents were killed and others taken hostage during the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. Mr. Steinmeier's visit to the largely destroyed kibbutz took place on the second day of his 2-day trip to Israel. At the invitation of President Herzog, the 2 presidents met with the residents of the kibbutz and were shown the ruins of houses and businesses which were destroyed during the attack. The German president announced that he will take the patronage for the rebuilding of the kibbutz's art gallery together with President Herzog so that people returning to the Be'eri will find a sort of anchor and to create conditions that young people, craftsmen from Germany and from Israel are meeting to cooperate closely in the rebuilding process. According to the German president, the German parliament will fund the rebuilding with 7 million euros.
Let me express my gratitude that we were invited by the President and his wife to Israel and that we are moved that he brought us here to Be'eri. In Germany, you know, we were able to listen to the news from the 7th of October. We were watching the TV, we saw the pictures, and it was easy to imagine what has happened here. But to be here, right in this place, is different. You know, the ruins behind us, they are the silent witness of what had happened here. And it's not easy to find the words to describe what we heard from those who have the knowledge and those who were witnessing the deeds, the murders, the killings, the rapes of the Hamas here on the 7th of October. We are here in the kibbutz, and the kibbutz movement is in a certain way linked to Europe and especially to Germany. This kibbutz in Be'eri was founded by Jews from Germany, from Hungary, and from former Czechoslovakia. And so therefore, The kibbutzim are part of the history, and they're, representing the soul of Israel. And being here means that we are able to witness how much this soul of Israel is touched and destroyed by the attack of Hamas.
Now I will show you people with smiles on their faces in a moment as friends of released teenagers were lined up to welcome them home, displaced in a hotel at the southern town of Eilat. Israeli teenagers from the Kibbutz near Oz, one of the communities worst hit by the October 7 attack, awaited the return of their hostage friends after they were held by Hamas in Gaza for 52 days. 9 children and 2 mothers, all from near Oz, near the border with Gaza, were freed by Hamas on Monday on the 4th day of a truce between Israel and Hamas, which saw the release of 69 Israeli hostages and 150 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Amongst others released were 12-year-old Yagil Yaakov and his brother, 16-year-old Or Yaakov. One of their friends said in his words, "We hope to meet them as soon as possible when they feel better. When they ask to see us, it'll be soon. It'll be as soon as we can." And that's where we leave it for this morning's coverage of Israel-Hamas war. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay.